Hey guys! Today I'm going to show you how to draw this dog eye in colored pencil. So for this drawing I used the Fabriano Artistico Hot Press watercolor paper. I wanted to use this paper because I was going to use the Zest pencil blender. These are all the different colors I used. I'm not going to list them off here, but I will put them down in the video description in case you want to see the full list of colors. So to start off with, I used the Luminance Sepia color, and I just put this in the darkest areas, the areas that were going to be the most black, and then also the ones that I wanted to have this kind of color to start with. And then I used the black to go in again in those darkest areas just to kind of get an idea of how dark I wanted those areas to be. I put this black in the areas that were going to be more actual really black spots, but I didn't put it in the areas that were going to be dark but weren't necessarily black and flat in color. Then I used the burnt sienna to put in some of the redder areas of the eye. Around the edges of the iris and right around the pupil there was kind of a reddish tone, so I used the burnt sienna for this. This color is great for getting kind of a reddish tone to stuff without making it too red. Then I used the Naples ochre and the brown ochre 10% over the whole of the iris. I wanted to get kind of a base yellow color for that area. I also used the raw umber 50% to kind of get some of the different areas that were a little bit more tinted towards green and not just yellow. I used the Faber-Castell black in some of the areas that I, again, wanted it to be more black. I also used the Faber-Castell sienna brown in the areas that I wanted to be, again, a little bit redder. Then for the whites of the eye, I used the violet gray. I like to use this color for the whites of the eyes because it gives it a little bit of a tint, because if you look at whites of the eye, they're not actually totally white. So I find this color looks really good for giving the whites of the eye kind of a colorful tint, but it still looks like white after you finish the drawing. There was also a little bit of brown in the whites of the eye, so I used the burnt ochre 50% for that. Then I kind of just went back with those same colors and did a little bit more layering in each area. When you're using the Zest or any blending solvent, you want to make sure that you have enough layers before you blend out. So I just did a couple more layers and then I used the Zest to blend it out. One thing that's really important when you're using a solvent is you want to make sure that you let it totally dry before you go back with pencil on top. For that reason, I like to work on one area at a time and then blend it out, and then I move on to another area while I let that first area dry. So then I started working on the blackest part of the fur. For this, I started with Payne's gray. I like to use this color for black fur that's tinted more bluish. This gives it a nice kind of blue hue, but it also keeps it dark enough that it still will look black. So I went over the whole of the area with this color, and then I just did a little bit darker in the areas that were going to be really dark. And then he has this kind of eyebrow looking area, so I started with the brown ochre for that. And then I used the Faber-Castell Nougat color to add in a little bit more of a browner. And then I used the Faber-Castell brown ochre because that one has a little more of a goldenish kind of tint to it. And I also used the Luminance brown ochre 10% on this area. So I just did a couple layers for each of those, and then I blended it out with the Zest again. I went back with the Faber-Castell black to darken up some of those really, really dark areas. In this picture, there was kind of a weird reflection on the pupil, so I used the Payne's gray to get a little bluish tint there. And then I went back with the Sienna brown and layered in those areas that I wanted to be a little redder again. And then I used the brown ochre kind of over all of the iris to get more of a golden look. And then for those darker areas that were more brown instead of black, I used the sepia color again. And then there were some areas that were a little bit more greenish, like I said, and I used the raw umber color for those. And then I just kept layering the brown ochre, the sienna brown, Payne's gray, and the black in the different areas to kind of just build up that color. And then for the whites of the eye, I kept layering the violet gray, ivory, and then the brown ochre in that little spot that was a little bit more brown. Around the outside of the actual eye, it looked, even though when you look at him, it looks like it's black. In the photo, you can tell it actually has more of a blue hue to it. So I used the Payne's gray 30% to start off with in this area. I wanted to start on this, and then I blended the iris and the whites of the eye out again, and then I went back and worked on the iris a little bit more. Each time I worked on it, I was pretty much just layering those same colors over and over again. When you're using this technique of the watercolor paper and the solvent blender, you just want to keep layering and layering and layering. This type of paper will let you get a lot of layers on it, which is great for this technique. As I was starting to get towards the final layers, I used the russet and yellow ochre color to get a little bit more vibrant color in the eye there. But then I did go back and layer again with the sienna brown and the brown ochres because I didn't want it to be too vibrant. So as I continued with the area right around the eye, I layered again with the Payne's gray 30%, and then I actually used the Faber-Castell dark sepia color. But at this point I kept it really light because I liked the color that you get, but I didn't want it to be super dark in that area. I also like to use this color in areas that are going to be black, so I went over the darkest black part with this as well. At this point I was mostly done with the iris, so then I just continued to work on the fur around the eye. I used the dark sepia, the Faber-Castell dark sepia color to kind of block in the darkest areas of the fur. Just like when doing the iris, with this you just want to make sure that you have a ton of layers down before you blend out the first time. And it doesn't necessarily have to be different colors. You can have 5 layers of the same color if that color is going to give you the overall color that you want at the end. So after the dark sepia, I did go back with some black in the areas that were going to be really dark. So for the lighter tan areas of fur, I used the brown ochre 10%, brown ochre 50%, the Faber-Castell Nougat and brown ochres. And depending on the different shadowing in each area, I just used a different mix of those colors. There was a lot of parts where the black fur kind of mixes in with the tan fur. So for these first layers, I was just mostly putting in the tan first, and then as I continued working, I started to put in more of the darker areas. I didn't want to put in too much of the black to start with because when you blend out, it'll make it too dark. It's easier to go back later and put in the black on top of the lighter color than if you put too much dark first and then you're trying to put the lighter color on top. So after I had about 5 to 10 layers in each area, I blended out with the Zested again. And then after it dried, I just kept layering those same colors over and over again. I did this about 4 times. And then after that, you could tell with each time the colors got richer and richer. The nice thing about using the Zested is you can actually put lighter colors on top of darker. This was really helpful for the black portion where there was some highlights. I could actually add those at the end. I didn't have to use the touch-up texture to do this. I could just use the pencil right on top. If you did want some really white highlights at the end and you couldn't get them with just using the pencil on top of the blended out, you could always use the touch-up texture with the titanium white, and that will give you a really white highlight. So the most important thing when you're using this kind of technique is to just make sure that you have enough layers. It's really easy to get to a point where you're like, oh, okay, I think it looks alright, I don't need to add any more. But the way you're going to get a really realistic look is by adding tons and tons of layers. It's also easy to kind of get bogged down when it is in the kind of ugly stage where you haven't quite added enough layers yet. So my biggest tip is to just keep going, push through that part where you don't really like how it looks, and you'll get to the part where it does look really nice and it looks really realistic and how you want it to. So this was kind of my first test of the Fabriano Artistico paper with colored pencils, and I think it's a great paper to use if you want to get a more painterly type look with your colored pencils. If you want your work to look more like it's a pencil drawing, then I wouldn't suggest using the solvent to blend. I think the solvent really does kind of make it look more like paint, and it's a totally different look than if you were just letting the pencils blend with themselves. But I do think it makes a really realistic look, so if that's kind of your goal, then this might be a good technique to try out. So I hope that this quick tutorial was helpful. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comment section. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for future tutorials. Bye guys!